Why don't you go see your boyfriend?
Yeah, he's got a nice room. He won't have it long. He left a call for 7 a.m.
Can you please look up this site?
See if we can figure out something.
Hi guys. Apparently StreamYard's not doing intros today, so let's try that again.
Why don't you go see your boyfriend?
Yeah, he's got a nice room. He won't have it long. He left a call for 7 a.m.
Okay, we'll take that as a no. I don't know why. It's just not playing, but it is frustrating me. Okay, so hi Lilith. You were here well early. Lisa as well, and then Sheena. I don't know why. I know that the intro started, but it didn't play in full, right? Should we try one more time? Let me disconnect. Let me disconnect my earphones because sometimes that causes it. Connect. Let's try. No, not two devices. I told you to disconnect this device. You naughty sausage. See, I think this is the problem. I think it's because it's on my phone and... Okay, let's try now.
Why don't you go see your boyfriend?
Yeah, he's got a nice room. He won't have it long. He left a call for 7 a.m.
Listen properly.
Can you please look up this site?
See if we can figure out something.
Okay, I figured it out. The problem was that my phone was still connected. And I've disconnected it now. What is my keyboard flashing about? We'll figure that out another time. Okay, so I ended the live last night. And as I went on to YouTube to find something to watch, I saw this massive update in the Mica Miller situation. I watched a bit of it, and then I decided to pause and watch it with everybody. Oh, there's a screaming cat and Vaughn's in a meeting. I don't know why you're shouting. But seems like it's over. And I'm going to pause at a specific point because I think what the lawyer says is very clever.
Today, John Paul Miller, Solid Rock Church, Inc., and the estate of Mica Francis Miller, along with individual members of the Francis family, have reached a full and final settlement on all presently filed litigation. The parties have also signed a full mutual release on all potential future litigation. The terms of the settlement agreement are sealed under a confidentiality agreement. The agreement and release include, but are not limited to, the dismissal with prejudice of the matters currently pending in both family court and probate court of Horry County. You just witnessed in court the withdrawal of the petition in probate court. Mica's family, Pastor Miller, and the church have set their differences aside to allow Mica's memory to live on without the encumbrance of contentious litigation. All parties now consider this matter closed. Those that have sought justice for Mica should feel accomplished in helping the Francis family in reaching this milestone. South Carolina criminal investigators have concluded their work of following up on the investigation done by Robeson County Sheriff's Office in this case, with nothing new to report. Unfortunately, we don't know every piece of information that led to the death of Mica. We do know that her life did serve a purpose. Her life mattered. Those that have spent every Sunday morning protesting outside of Solid Rock Church, chanting "Justice for Mica," should recognize this time of healing and move on with their lives. We only ask that you remember Mica as the wonderful, beautiful person that she was. And now Regina may have something to say.
It is true.
Hi, Mel. Okay, so basically, Mica Miller was a pastor's wife who took her life in a forest, well, at a national park and a nature park, and she phoned 911 and said she was going to do it. And essentially what it came down to looking like was that he had kind of driven her to that point. And why am I hearing? Oh, I had Judge Simpson on. I was so confused because I could hear court. I had Judge Simpson on my phone before this. So it looked like he had driven her to that point, and she had been posting on Facebook about needing help. He had been tracking her. He had been kind of stalking her. One thing that really concerned me, allegedly. One thing that concerned me was that he had this whole narrative that she was incredibly mentally ill and needed medication for that. What was weird for me was that her family didn't seem to agree with that. Fair enough. But he said specifically that when they went to get this help, the doctor told him that Mica is so ill, it's urgent, that she may try to take her life. However, they didn't hold her. And he said it's because she was an adult that they weren't allowed to. Now, you can section someone if they are a danger to themselves or others. In the US, they can be sectioned. That doesn't make sense to me. Here is an interview. Let me actually put it in chat. Here is an interview with the husband. So basically, because they went to mediation, they can't talk much about it. But this is Mica's family lawyer and her kind of spokesperson. Listen to what she says about the next steps.
It's true that we reached a global settlement on all issues that could have been brought to court. Some additional things that are some things that are pending now, as well as things that could have been filed. Those have been resolved as well. As far as justice for Mica, that we are ready to go to the next chapter. And the next chapter is to go and convince our General Assembly to take a look at the coercive control law bill. We need that on the agenda ASAP. We need it taken seriously. We need it to be made into law in the very next session of the General Assembly. Standing by and doing nothing is unacceptable. It is absolutely.
So everything has been cleared up. But what I do want us to look into is coercive control. Why is that the next step? She's basically said it. If you read between the lines, Phoebe, seriously, she wants to go in and out the entire time. The lawyer is basically saying, read between the lines, and she's pulling the ultimate, I've mentioned this a few times on the channel, but no comment. And then what does the person say? Decline to comment.
Absolutely embarrassing. I urge everyone, if you want the final piece of justice for Mica, which means justice for all who have been domestically abused, please put your efforts into getting in touch with your legislators. Get in touch with the people who have the power to do something here, and do it now. These other things that you're doing, that time has passed. It is time to move to the next chapter. We want to focus on the memory and the beauty of Mica and everything that she has represented for herself and every single person that has ever been in her situation. And we, her family, when I say we, I'm talking about the Francis family. They need your help. They need your help on this. We don't want to talk about Mr. Miller anymore. We want to move forward to the next chapter, and that is getting this law passed. So I urge you, please contact my office if you want to volunteer. We are putting together benefits to raise money for this cause. We are also looking at a potential rally on the Capitol if the General Assembly doesn't get it together. Now, I know that some of you are going to be somewhat disappointed to hear that we reached an agreement. Let me tell you about that agreement. First of all, the terms are supposed to be confidential, but nobody can keep a secret anymore. Setting that aside, please don't be disappointed by it. Whenever you're involved in litigation of this magnitude, and this many things to cover and all the complexities of it, could take years to go through a court system. We do not want the Francis family or anyone to be drugged through litigation for years. We want to put this behind us and move on to the next chapter that matters. And when we say that we've gotten justice for Mica as a result of this settlement, it is true.
So again, we've not just closed the probate court matter today, but we've resolved every matter between the Francises, Mr. Miller, and the church. So we can't answer any questions about the settlement or about the agreement. That's the point. It's confidential, and it needs to be that way. You can try to ask a question that doesn't pertain to that, and we might be able to answer it if you want to try. Anybody have a question?
So can I, you might not be able to answer this, but the obvious question, Regina, if you can speak to this on the family side, but how did you guys come to this agreement of withdrawing the request?
Very good question. So part of resolving all of the cases that's pretty much where we start. Okay. The global settlement, which really, I was also retained to file a civil action, potentially wrongful death and things like that. Okay. Litigation, there's always our side and their side. There's always strengths to cases and weaknesses to cases. Okay. And so it's in order to, to facilitate moving to the next place that we need to be. It was in the best interest of the family to do that. We had to always, there's always this duty, and excuse me, this is that. There's always a duty whenever litigation is filed. Okay, we have court rules here that say that any matter that is contested is required to go through ADR, alternative dispute resolution, i.e. mediation. So regardless, even if we had went ahead and filed actions, we would have been under court rules to engage in mediation to get it resolved. You know, we can't get Mica back, okay? There's no undoing that. The only way that the law can provide anything to anyone that's ever, you know, damaged in any kind of way is for compensation and other things that we all agreed to, you know, certain other terms other than that. So it was going to be a matter of time. We would be required to do that anyway. We call this pre-litigation, you know, mediation. We didn't have a formal mediation, but Russell and I had engaged in an intensive talking back and forth right up to the last second of coming to this court.
Attorney Long, you referenced the state reviewing some of the Robeson County investigations. Also noticed that your statement conspicuously did not mention any potential federal investigation into Pastor Miller. Can you comment on the status of that federal investigation? Can you tell us which state agency reviewed the Robeson County investigation?
I don't believe I indicated state or federal. I said South Carolina investigators. You
Can
can,
you tell us who you were referring to when you were?
I'm referring to whoever has investigated this case, federal and state. Yes, sir.
So all, from your perspective, all criminal inquiries into John Paul Miller are concluded?
We believe so. We have every reason to believe so. We've asked for definitive answers on that, and the answers and or lack of answers that we've received can only lead to that answer, that they have in fact concluded their investigation.
So just to confirm, the decision to withdraw that request was just because it was going to happen sometime, and you didn't want to put the family through that. You both didn't want to put the family through that.
Okay, let me see if I understand. You're asking about us withdrawing the request in terms of probate and continuing to serve as a special administrator. Okay, special administrator has limited duties. Okay, and she would. Our petition was to have her be appointed as the personal representative, which has an overall duty of the estate from the beginning to the end. In terms of a special administrator, the limitation is to collect, as the order stated, is to collect property that may belong to the estate, preserve that property, because at that point there was no personal representative that had been named. And so an estate cannot be without some form of administrator to oversee and protect the property and preserve the estate. So what the court will do is kind of like a Band-Aid measure, a quick measure, is to appoint what's referred to as a special administrator. They also have duties like when there's a conflict of interest, because if a personal representative is somehow involved in something else related to the decedent, then that may create a conflict. It doesn't prevent them necessarily from serving as a personal representative, but as a special administrator, her duties were somewhat limited. We have reached all of those, and as far as once we reach this settlement agreement, then there's no need for her to continue to anything else in Mica's case. The court has required us to do a Form 2, which we will do. And then once she completes that, the order that was issued by the probate judge was very, very clear in what her duties would involve. And so now that we've got this global settlement, she can step back from that. There are always some other administrative duties that need to be, finished up with regard to the estate, some required forms through the probate court. And assuming that Mr. Miller is appointed her personal representative, which had not any reason to believe he wouldn't be, then he would be tasked with the duties to complete and close out that estate with regard to whatever forms and documents are required to do that.
And is the family content, Mica's family content with this agreement that you guys have come to?
Yes, if they were not, we would not have reached the agreement. There's as in any type of negotiation, there's always give and take. I once had a retired judge that served as a mediator told me one time when I was a young lawyer, said if you're if both parties walk away feeling like they didn't get everything, or they got some things and not everything, and everybody feels like they're not exactly 100% happy, then it's a great compromise, because that means that one side didn't get everything that they wanted, but neither did the other. And that would be the same here. But what we got is completely satisfactory to the entire family. As you know, Sierra is not only the special administrator and the plaintiff in the marital estate, she's also the personal representative or spokesperson for her very large family. And I can just tell you this, that family does nothing that they all don't agree to. So it took a bit to go through that, and everyone, contributed in some form or fashion, and therefore, everybody is satisfied with the end result.
Mr. Long, can you talk about what happens in the next 10 days? I believe that you spoke about
I'm sorry?
The next 10 days, I believe they had mentioned something about that.
Oh, yeah. His Honor, just now in the probate matter, has other matters there were filings involved in the case. He has to make a ruling on what part of those filings can remain in the record and if part of those filings need to be sealed. So there are 10 days set in by His Honor just now to give the parties a time to hash that out and bring those to light, and that way he can make a final ruling.
And do you guys, is there any on your side plan to file a wrongful death suit?
Absolutely not. No, this global settlement settles John Paul Miller and the church and the entire Francis family in their entirety. There will be no actions filed by either one. And I'd like, again, I want to bring up what Ms. Ward has brought up in two ways about the people who've decided to carry on the Justice for Mica / shut down Solid Rock Church protests that are going on every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock in front of Solid Rock Church. The Francis family just asked them through their attorney to focus their energy somewhere else. She asked them to help focus their energy towards the passing of this Coercive Control Act. She asked them to focus that energy on the legislators that are around the state. Mm-hmm. She's asking them to do that. That means that the Francis family, Mica's family, the people who love and care for her the most, have asked the protesters to leave the church alone. I would ask that they leave the churchgoers alone. These poor people are just trying to go to church on Sunday, and they're being harassed, and they're being put in fear, and they're being made not to feel comfortable trying to go to church. The point is, this is over. This is today, this agreement, this global agreement that's been signed by everybody involved, is Mica's justice. The next step, which Ms. Ward pointed out, is their legislative goal to help reach out and talk the state legislature into passing this Coercive Control Act. That's what's left for these protesters to do if they feel like they still have energy to put towards this, not harassing church members. So we would ask that this be the end of that. Anything else?
Okay, so after that, there is an interview with her attorney and her sister. I'm going to do sister first because if court pops up or something, then we might have to pause and circle back to the attorney. The attorney's 46 minutes.
So this week, our media outlet traveled to Conway and Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for a court hearing, a probate court hearing involving the case of Mica Miller. This is a story which has attracted international attention. Now, at that hearing, a surprise settlement was announced between the family of Mica Miller and John Paul Miller and Solid Rock Church. Now, this was a global settlement, meaning it encompassed all actions involving all of the parties to this case. Now, it was a surprise announcement, and it was greeted in some circles with consternation and criticism. But in the hours leading up to the settlement, I sat down for the first time ever on camera with Abigail Francis, the youngest sister of Mica Miller, and what ended up being her final interview before the settlement was reached, literally just an hour before the settlement was reached. Here in its entirety is my conversation with Abby Francis. Abby Francis, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with us. Obviously, this is something your family never could have imagined. Can you just tell us the last 3 months of life for your family, your sisters, your parents? What has it been like having to go through this international story? But for you, it's not some international story, it's your sister.
Honestly, unreal. If I talk too much about it, it's mind blowing to feel or to understand that this is even real. Like when I got the call, I was like, is this real? What is even happening? You know? And to just think about Mica, and her words are still in my brain all the time. And whenever we would hang out with her and I would go on beach walks constantly. It was me and my sister. And whenever she was in the other situation, when she was still there, I didn't have those moments with her. And when she was finally herself in her own area, living in her own apartment, it was like I got my sister back and we could have those sister moments and those sister talks.
Just want to say, like, from a media perspective, this is very strange. I've lost the word, but the way they've done the screen, like this dark shadow here and this dark shadow here, and this with these boxes that are probably empty. Like, I would rather they be having a conversation on like couches or something a little less stiff. It's feeling very uncomfortable. But this guy is independent. I think this is Fitz News. I think they're an independent news station.
And we would go to lunch together, and it was like nothing ever happened. And
Framing.
she used her experiences to grow as a person and to help everybody around her and consistently uplift everybody else in her circumstances. So it was basically like having my sister again. And then for it to be completely ripped away, there aren't really any words.
Yeah. But before you lost her, she would be ripped away for long periods by John Paul. He would forbid her to see you, to speak with you, isolating her from your entire family. Obviously, we know how difficult that was for her, but what was that like for your family to not be able to talk to her, to see her during those times when you knew she was struggling?
A lot of what was going on, she didn't tell us. So there are some things that we weren't aware of because she kept that from us. And even learning some just different people throughout this whole thing, they're like, so where were you during this time? It's like, she didn't call me. I had no idea. And she, to my understanding, is she just didn't want us to know what was going on, especially on that, you're my little sibling. I don't want you to know everything that I'm going through. And just talking with her about things that she was going through, she would always just say, you have to remember in those times when we weren't talking, I was under duress.
She would tell you that.
Yeah, she's like, I couldn't talk to you in those moments. And if we didn't have a relationship with a specific person, then we couldn't have a relationship with her. And if we didn't have holidays at specific areas, then we couldn't have her there with us. So it was pretty much give and take, and be present whenever you could. Honestly, we would maybe get 5 minutes with her. We could go get a coffee. Some days we wouldn't even see her. I would call her and I would get 5 minutes with her on the phone, and then we wouldn't see her for a while. So it was definitely back and forth. Sister, are you still my sister, or are you someone who's going through their own thing? And everything that kept going back and forth, like even the last couple of months when her and I were talking, it's like, what was going on in this situation? And she sometimes wouldn't want me to know. And I think a lot of it too is just her being that older sister and not wanting everybody to know what she was going through. She didn't want anybody to know, as well as what Attorney Ward was saying, is Mica did not want anybody to know the full extent of whatever she was going through, because she didn't want to drag anybody down. She didn't want to out anybody else's sins, because that's, as a Christian, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to throw stones. You're not supposed to tell anybody like, hey, they did me wrong. that's God is the vengeance and he will handle it. So it's not up for us to say he did so and so or they did so and so. It'll come out eventually by their own undoing and it'll be taken care of.
So this is a good point for me to just hop across to this one. This was, I just want to double check the date. She started posting some things on Facebook about how things were going. And for those who don't know the story, these became a big focus in could it have been the husband that did something. So initially it was trying to rule out that he actually was there when she took her life. And once that was ruled out, then it was kind of like, well, he might not have been there, but did she feel that there was no escaping him besides this way out?
I've kind of had to keep my circle really small for the past couple weeks just because I'm going through a lot and it's hard and it's my cross to bear. It's the thing that God has put in my life to deal with, and I don't want to bring a lot of people into it. I'm so thankful to God for a strong family and the friends that God has put in my life to be there for me at this time. I'm trying to get my priorities straight right now. And that's making sure that my heart doesn't have any unforgiveness, bitterness, resentment, just forgiveness and hope for the future and peace. Because you can't put a price on peace from God. So thank you for all your prayers and support. Know that I have to keep my circle really, really small right now. I'm used to having a really big circle, so it's hard because I want to reach out to everybody and tell you how much I love you and I miss you. But this is the best way that I know how. So I love you all. I miss you. Thank you for your love and support over the last couple years. And some of you, up to 18 years walking with me as my friends. And for right now, I've just had to put everything on pause to get myself right. And I think God's happy with that. So keep praying for me. Thank you.
So she was kind of like mentioning that things were tough. He is the pastor of this church that she obviously was part of. And she couldn't say outright what was happening on her social media. No, she wasn't streaming or anything. She was just like a big role player in the church world of their church. But to people closer to her, she was talking about how like the tracking was picking up. She was gearing up to leave. And the most dangerous time in a DV person's life is when they are going to leave.
You've seen, obviously, we called it the totality of the abuse that your sister endured, the harassment, the destruction of her property, of isolation, of manipulation, of gaslighting, all these narcissistic moves by this man. Let me ask you this. You had occasion to know this John Paul Miller. Is he a false prophet? This guy telling the church one thing about your sister in an effort to try to perhaps absolve himself of what he's done, but you had an up-close look at both of these two people. Tell me what you saw when you looked at John Paul Miller.
It's kind of a difficult question for me to answer because, for one, being family, and then for two, I did attend the church and he was my pastor for a while. And at one point, I would question why I'm even there constantly. And it was always led back to, Mike is your sister. She needs help, out of the obligation of not only helping the body of Christ, because if you're a Christian and the Bible and the church says we need help, you step up wherever they need you. But for your sister to say, hey, I am really in the weeds and I really need your help. Can you please help me? It went back and forth with that. And I always wanted to help Mica in any way that I could. And I did help her in every way that I could. And it just kept feeling like each one of my arms was being pulled, and I had to remove myself and say, I just can't do it anymore, but I'm still here for you when you need me. And I can't be there at that church. I can be in your life and I can help you in every way, especially with you being my sister, not even based on any circumstances that were happening, but you're my sister and I want you to be a part of my life. And it just kept getting pulled back and forth. Well, if you're not involved in this, then you can't hang out with her during this, or you hung out with her during this. So she's already had that time hanging out with the family. So now she's going to go do this. And it was constant. We were being told when we can hang out with her rather than us just hanging out.
And that extended after she died too, didn't it? Walk us through some of that. What happened after you heard and when you had to interact with him?
I haven't seen him. I have not seen him. I have not talked to him. I've done nothing. There is no reason anymore. My only reason to have any involvement with him was because of Mica. I have no intention of talking about him, talking to him, going anywhere near him. I don't have a reason.
Let me ask you this, though. Do you want to see justice done on this earth to him? And if so, let me ask you this, what would that look like?
Anything that happens on this earth, justice-wise, I believe for Mica's individual circumstances, we'll be getting Mica's law passed. Because for one, it has her name in it. And for two, the system failed her. And everything that happened could have been prevented. I 100% believe that. If the course of control bill that was submitted in 2021, 2020, if that were to pass, she would still be here. And the only justice that if we can see, because in the beginning, I didn't want Mica to be known as a domestic violence victim or an abuse victim or anything like that, because she's much more than that. And now my hair's purple. So it's like you have to go back and forth with realizing and coming to terms with, is she going to get any justice, period? And that would be Mica's law. And for anybody else in those circumstances, yeah, I would love for them to get their own justice. That if they can find any way, I would say go for it. And for it to be a thing, I really don't know. But at the end of the day, something's going to happen because we all got to answer to someone. And accountability needs to be taken in account. You can't just do something. And I mean, biblical terms, yeah, sure, you repent, God's going to forgive you. But worldly terms, you have to accept responsibility. And the actions that you do, there are consequences. So if someone can get these consequences lined up, then I truly believe that it's going to happen. But if Mica's law is not here and there's nothing for them to go off of, then people are going to keep manipulating the non-existent system that South Carolina doesn't have.
Just from a journalism perspective, this is going to be so ironic because I'm literally interrupting to say this, but I'm always so appreciative of a journalist who doesn't interrupt the person giving the answer and lets them give the space. And I spoke about it when we were watching Banfield. I stopped watching her interviews because it was like, it didn't matter what the other people were saying. She didn't give them the space. So I really like this, how this little news outlet that's like 5,000 subscribers, I think. Very new. No, I'm wrong. 52,000. They're doing, I like it.
Manipulated law enforcement, manipulated his parishioners.
Correct.
And also it's been alleged, we've heard allegations that there are other victims. Mm-hmm. In fact, John Paul Miller's first wife explicitly laid out some of those allegations in one of the filings related to this case. Is that what drives you? And we're going to talk in a minute about some of the work you're doing, because you're not just sitting around in the aftermath of this. You're very, very busy. And we're going to talk about some of the projects you got going here, Abby. But as you think about those potential future victims, if you will, of people like John Paul, again, assuming all these allegations are true, which, we've got a pretty credible stack of evidence here. But if Michael were here and looking at the situation, and looking at what's happened in the aftermath of her death, where would her focus be, do you think? What do you think would be most important to her? You knew her as well or better than anyone. What do you think would be what she would want to see in terms of that accountability?
The mission trip. She started that, she founded it, and for it to be taken into a different area and to be twisted and lies to be said about it, that would break her. It was something that she started, something that she's wanted to do since she was young. She's always wanted to go to Africa. She's always wanted to be the Angelina Jolie mixed with Carrie Job. She wanted to be that Christian artist that helped people, as well as Angelina Jolie, going to Africa and helping these children that need help and being the missionary. She loved going and doing that and realized that her purpose on earth is not just to be a servant for one person. She always said, my purpose as this position, either if it was a wife or a pastor's wife or a sister or a stepmother or whatever it was, it always got boiled down to one purpose. And people have many purposes in life. God has multiple plans for your life. It's not just one big thing. There are many things that attribute to that. And the biggest thing that she was really focusing on was being a missionary and helping the children. And for that to be used against her and ripped away,
held over.
That's very malicious. No matter who you are, no matter what your connections are, to use that against anybody, I don't know why anybody would do that.
It was his leverage, wasn't it?
Correct.
We were talking earlier with Attorney Ward, and I wanted to see if you agreed with this too, that one of Mica's key focuses in all of this was to keep people from being driven from the church, to keep people from having a bad taste in their mouth when they thought of church. And you've obviously seen in the aftermath of this that there have been a lot of folks who have come down on Christianity, they've come down on organized religion. When you see those kind of statements, what do you feel? What does that make you think?
One of the biggest things that we said in the middle of her memorial service was, do not let this affect your relationship with God. Because at the end of the day, it's not about what your religion is or.
I'm gonna just quickly skim through, because this part you can watch on your own. I don't really want to be reacting to religion related things, and we are coming close to 2, which is the end of my lunch, which is also I think at 2:30 they head into court. Also, I don't know much about the trip to Africa. Does anyone know where in Africa she was going to do this? We sometimes refer to like foreigners coming here to do things as like trauma tourism, because like for us it's like interesting choice. Hey Donald, hey Chini, hey Judy. Don't know if I missed anyone.
The only reason I had to see him was for Mica, and she's gone, to say, and I have no ill intent for anything. And that's very hard for anybody to say and to truly mean. And again, I don't want to see him. I have no intent to see him. I have no reason to see him. The only reason I had to see him was for Mica, and she's gone.
I want to ask you now a little bit about what you've been doing these past few months since this tragedy befell your family. As I mentioned earlier, you were not sitting still. You're not taking any of this lying down. In addition to working on the law, you've got a big benefit concert coming up. Tell us a little bit about.
Okay. So, oh, hi, Steve. I thought you were here earlier, much earlier. Otherwise, why are you late? No, I'm joking. So, let's pause that for a second. I was thinking about how to word this because, like, I don't want it to come across offensive, and it's completely a side thing to this. This is like, it's got nothing to do with Mica. I think I could see what really grabbed me about this is she was clearly a wonderful, wonderful human. And after watching that interview on Friday, I think, or whenever we watched it, that guy, he gives me bad vibes. Not necessarily anything to do with this. Don't know. Bad vibes there. What I was meaning with the trauma tourism is like, do you know what people here, and in case you're new, I'm in Cape Town, South Africa. Do you know what we could use a lot more than prayer is food, education, electricity, Maslow's hierarchy. Like, it would be super helpful if people were coming to, like, for example, there's a thing that happens once a year called a hackathon, which is where like a bunch of internet-y people get together and build websites for charity organizations. That is a lot more helpful than just coming and talking to people. Like, paint buildings, build something, get schools looking better so that kids aren't like not wanting to go, like understanding literally the basic needs that we don't have. And I'm extremely lucky. Like, for comparison, our minimum wage is 50 cents, 50 US cents. That's our minimum wage. So coming and talking about religion when you don't even know if you're going to be able to have a meal in the next week isn't as helpful as people think it is. It's like, I really appreciate wanting to make a difference and wanting to spread the word and that sort of thing. I'm not religious. I'm not going to like go into the religion side of it. I just wanted, like, from a African perspective, because like South Africa is also a little different. When people talk about going on mission trips to Africa, they're generally not talking about South Africa. They're talking about North Africa. But we still have those sorts of problems. Anyway, let's go to a lawyer. There's nothing up yet on the trial. However, she said 8:30, so we still have 40 minutes. Yeah, Chini, I get you. Well, Steve, this is a funny, but also like, I want to laugh, but I can't, because there are people who, like, our poverty line's incredibly low, and I can't word it like on the spot without something sounding wrong. Also, we have electricity problems, like, not at the moment, but probably soon. For 10 years, we've had electricity problems. Like, actually, you know what the most helpful thing would be? To come and help people set up ways to earn an income online, etc. That would be the most helpful. And it needs to be done in a way that the infrastructure can't be stolen, damaged, etc. Micah wanted to help build a school. Okay. So then, that's why I said, like, I don't want to comment on her part. I'm just meaning, like, we come across this a lot where it's like, yeah, we're coming from the US to spread the word in Africa. And then you're like in Cape Town, which is developed, has plenty of churches, etc. And what people actually need is infrastructure or schools or both of the above.
So this week, our news team traveled to South Carolina's Grand Strand, where a surprise development in the case of Mica Miller unfolded, a settlement between Miller's family and John Paul Miller and the Solid Rock Church, where he is the pastor. Now, this settlement is a global agreement encompassing all actions and all parties to this case. So it is a significant development, not one without controversy, however. But before the settlement was reached, literally just hours before, our media outlet sat down to conduct an interview with the lead attorney for the Francis family, Mica Miller's family, Regina Ward. Here in its entirety is that conversation. Attorney Ward, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down.
So the settlement reminds me of with Gabby Petito and the family, like at some stage, the family just needs to think for themselves, like not think for themselves, think of themselves and draw the line. Like they tried so hard, and the settlement essentially, as far as I know, went into the Gabby Petito Foundation. So I can understand the family deciding to do this. I cannot imagine not getting that closure and wondering and everything. Just they haven't had the chance to breathe. Bolstering your infrastructure physically instead of just talking about it. Yeah. Or even just like doing kind things that are part of the basic needs. Like, you know, making sandwiches instead of talking about getting more food. Like doing something that you can't do anything else when you're starving, when you're cold, when you're not sure where your next meal's coming from, where you're sleeping tonight. You can't think of anything, especially starving. Like there are some areas where people are buying teaspoons of sugar loose. Like you go and you pay for those few granules of sugar because they can't afford to do more than that on that day.
Sit down with us today. I know it's a big day. In fact, there's a hearing on this case today. As we're taping this, you're preparing for this hearing in Horry County Probate Court. I wanted to ask you, before we get into the details of this massive case, which we can see here, the work your office is putting into it, I wanted to ask you, you were representing Mica. You were talking to Mica in the days, in the weeks leading up to what happened back in April. Can you tell us anything about those interactions, about her state of mind, her frame of mind? Everything we've been shown indicates a woman who was looking forward, who was excited about this new life that she was embarking on. Can you tell us just anything about her demeanor during those days?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And what you just said is exactly the impression that I got. In fact, she sat pretty much in that chair you're sitting right now in one of our interactions and talking about it. And she was so happy that she shared with me that she felt that she'd finally found what God's calling was for her life, which was basically the missions, the children in Africa, and education for children who are deprived of an appropriate education. She was, let me just say, ecstatic, and it was uplifting
to hear her talk about it and to see her so happy about it. And she most assuredly was of, there was no indication of anything, remotely close to a severe depression or anything like that. Of course, anyone that goes through a divorce or separation or an ending of a marriage, there is always, what we call situational depression. In other words, this situation is making me sadder than most. But she was taking responsibility of making sure that she was addressing that with the appropriate therapist and her medical doctor. So I was so happy for her because she had finally reached a place where she was done and she was ready to move on, and she just didn't want to fight anymore.
Mm-hmm. You talked about that plan that she had for her life, the mission work. How central to Mica Miller was faith?
It was the core and the soul of her. Whenever you met Mica, you just felt like you were pulled into the joy that the spiritual word, the word of God, and the teachings of Jesus were principles that she was drawn to, that she was wanting to really abide by in every way possible. And then, which kind of reminds me of what I thought about at one point after her death was that I know that she was really, really, really struggling with this, I guess, sort of a contradiction, but not really, in the word of the Bible. And she actually made some videos touching on this. And one thing was, God hates divorce. God hates divorce. So what that means is when you're in a marriage is you're supposed to do the work to try to prevent that. She also talked about, forgiveness and praying for our enemies. And when someone does something wrong, is not honest in their dealings with you, or they've said or done something that may hurt you, that you're supposed to be Jesus-like and forgive that person and not.
Okay, my lunch is about to end, but what I wanted to say that I was just thinking about as well is that I think we also we tend to cringe when there's like people from the US coming here for mission work, because that's kind of how colonialism, like some of the colonialism and that sorts came about. So it was like there was like a group of missionaries that came here to spread the word and, save the heathens. But just because somebody doesn't believe the same thing as you doesn't mean they're evil or less intelligent or should be treated less than. So there's also that, like, that's probably the most important connection that I'd tell you is like, hey, tea time. Thank you for the support. Annabelle, I haven't recently, but I might have, because all of this was going on when I was in Edinburgh. And I remember being in the hotel room and watching a video about her. But I can't remember if I saw that one. I watched a lot of the ones on Facebook. Well, a lot of the ones she had posted on Facebook, her statuses of like talking about getting out and, she can't say what's going on. Mostly what we watched this morning. Actually, here's the perfect little write-up. It says, missionaries from the American border arrived in South Africa in 1835, motivated largely by the millenarian tradition, They came here to preach the gospel and save heathen souls before the second coming. Their early efforts were unsuccessful. So they came to South Africa, to the land where people were doing their thing and like, no, you need saving. And then often things would go awry, and I don't want to go into the words relating to the things that went awry, but you can understand the reluctance to have people come and save people here, because
not only forgive that person, you're to pray for them. So now you have, and then the other principle is the principle of being an obedient spouse as a wife. You know, and the religious teachings that she followed is that the man is the head of the household, and the wife should be subservient to him. But there's a flip side of that. In order for the man to gain his wife, you know, being subservient or to following his lead and guide, is that the Bible also says that you treat your wife as the bride of Christ, and you're supposed to protect her and do, you know, all that you can to make sure that she flourishes and is nurtured. So she had this difficulty in reconciling. I have a duty as a spouse to follow the lead of my husband, and to do the things that he asked me to do, and she did, even the terrible things.
She was also zealously protective of the church, of the Christian faith.
Absolutely.
She didn't want what was transpiring in her life to turn people off to faith, to attending church. And in fact, you can even argue that she perhaps endured some of this that perhaps no one else would have, because she didn't want people to be turned off or steered away from faith. You think that was...
That absolutely was important to her. She would make the comment or statement that church is not a person, the church is not the man, the church is not the pastor, the church is the people. She absolutely loved that church. She did everything that she could to try to protect the church. She didn't want the church or the congregation, the members, to take this sort of situation and lose their faith. It was incredibly important to her that not interfere. And I think she did a video where she talked about, she apologized for having to keep her circle kind of small, you know, at this time. And that was for a number of reasons. But at the same time, it was like, you know, please continue to believe in God and have your faith and say your prayers and, you know, continue to live and abide by the teachings of our Bible.
It's amazing to see someone be able to do that when they are the subject of this relentless manipulation and mischaracterization, kind of like a inside the church smear campaign being waged against her.
Yes.
Yet she continued to do her best not to cause believers to stumble, basically.
Correct. She was, I would say she was self-sacrificial, that she was willing to sacrifice herself in order to preserve and protect the followers of the word, that they would not get distracted by the fallible man that may be associated with it. That is not what brings you to church. What brings you to church are the teachings of God and what Jesus, what he represented in this world. And so that was critically important to her to protect that. And I think to some degree, maybe to her own detriment, in that she endured things for a longer period of time, hoping and praying, just like the teachings were, you know, be an obedient wife. That means don't go against your husband, you know, be a good Christian, and that you forgive your enemies. Someone's doing bad, terrible things to you, you're still supposed to forgive them and pray for them. You know, and at the end, when she finally reconciled, I feel like that, you know, God does not want you to stay in marriage just because he hates divorce. God hates abuse. God hates abuse. And just like she said, what do you think that God thinks about that? What do you think he would do about that? In other words, she was laying, you know, what was happening to her. She did not want to be vindictive and lash out and smear him. She would not allow me as the attorney. What I wanted to do was put a lot of this in the pleadings, and she did not give me permission to do that. She said, I don't want that to happen. I just want to be separated. I just want this to stop. I just want to move on with my life. And at the end of a year, I'll get the divorce. And of course, it didn't quite work out that way. And I wish that she would have let me put some of those things in there. But at the end of the day, what it was is she wanted to still protect her husband. Okay. She definitely wanted to protect the church, the name of the church, the congregation, and everything. And she didn't want to use that. She had everything she could have used in that situation and chose not to. She said that God doesn't want me to be vindictive. God doesn't want me to lash out. And at the end of the day, what she was referring to is God is the one who will judge, and God is the one who will punish.
She's got that right. Let me ask you this. You talked about that way forward, that future for her that she was embracing. You said that she'd reconciled herself.
Yes.
We've all seen that Ring camera footage from the day that she died.
Yes.
And I've watched it probably a dozen times, and I see
So have I.
A woman on her way to work, leaving at the time that she would leave to go to work.
Yes.
Starting to get into that new routine of this new chapter of her life. Obviously, something happened after she walked away out of the view of that camera. Something happened between then and the 911 call that was placed.
Correct.
At the.
I'm just quickly getting that. Welcome, Judy. Happy to have you in the macaroni bowl. And what good timing. Let me see where I'm eating maca bolognese. Oh, wait, let me just want to make myself smaller for this part. Actually, I'll take myself off the screen. There's no audio, by the way, so far. Not sure what to make of that. I didn't see much there. No, I don't know. Cannibalism. That's called cannibalism, my dear children. Wait, let me start from the beginning. Everything in this room is eatable, even you, my dear children, but that's called cannibalism and is frowned upon in most societies.
At the Lumber River Park up in North Carolina. Let me ask you this question. What do you think happened that day?
Well, of course, anything that I would think is speculation, and that is the $1 million question. I personally believe that answer to that, or some
Trigger
form
warning.
of answer to that, will be on that cell phone or that Apple Watch that is in the possession of the legal authorities. And so we have a court order requiring those things to be released to my office, and they won't release it until they have finished their quote investigation, all legal authorities. And so I'm hoping that when I get my hands on those things, that may hold the answer. But I also, from a theoretic sort of a, stance, is that Mr. Miller was very consistent in his contact with her. He's even made comments in other news agencies and so forth that he sent her 6 or 7 emails. I haven't got my hands on those yet. He made comments that he sent emails to her on the same day that she died, and then realized that there were 2 that she probably didn't get. There are a couple of things that don't add up. There are 2 specific things that he said that were so contradictory, and there's outside evidence to prove it and to sustain what I'm thinking about particularly. But I would say that I would not be surprised if he made some form of contact with her, because you have to remember that
On the day she died.
Yes. You have to remember that I served him the separation papers on that day. So he had made a comment to me specifically that, gosh, something must be really wrong, because Regina Ward has been hired on the case. And we know nobody gets Regina Ward unless it's a big case. And I was like, okay, well, we're not making a big deal out of it. We're just pursuing a separation. So I would not be surprised if he did not start at that moment, the second that he got served, to start berating her with either phone calls or leaving her messages or texting her. Basically, he weaponized the Bible against her, and I would not be surprised if that happened.
So I have to give mad props to both the journalist, Will, and this attorney, because that she was well aware she was going to mediation that afternoon. And once mediations happened, she can't talk about it. So she does this interview just hours before. The journalist obviously needed to do edits and things, but you'd want to get it out pretty fast, right? She would also have said to him, most likely, that the mediation would be that afternoon. So he would be potentially holding out for the outcome of the mediation. But both of them managing to pull this off just hours before, absolutely brilliant. This is the type of journalism that I adore. Still get the word out there, still doing it the right way. They're still keeping it clean on both sides. You're not breaking any rules. The story needs to be told, and that's how it's being done. Mel, he's singing the song from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And yes, they were separated. They were in the process of separation. He was making it incredibly hard for her.
Let's talk a little bit about
allegedly
that weaponization of the scripture, isolating her from family, from friends, the tactics of this man and the totality of this abuse, harassment, stalking. And it wasn't just Mica, was it? There are others who have fallen victim to John Paul Miller, aren't there?
It appears to be. There's definitely a pattern that seems to have emerged here. Whenever you put everything together, it is a consistent pattern that's not only consistent to what Mr. Miller himself has done, but I've been practicing law for almost 20 years, and even though I'm a general practitioner doing family court, criminal, and personal injury, probably more than 50% of my clients are in the domestic arena. And of that 50% of those clients, I would say probably nearly 50% of those are always coming in complaining about, narcissistic tendencies of their spouse, controlling tendencies of their spouse. They all seem to have the same types of complaints. He took my credit cards, he cut up my credit cards, he turned off my phone, he took my phone, he changed the password on my computer. All of these things to just keep backing and boxing a person in. And it's very prevalent, and it's been overlooked for far too long.
And we're going to talk about some of this as we get into the coercive control angle of this and the potential for legislation here in South Carolina that could enhance the current domestic violence statutes. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you this about the current state of play as it relates to the civil cases that are currently pending, custody, probate, but also the potential for additional civil actions, whether from the Francis family, from potential other victims. Walk us through sort of the overview of the lay of the land civilly.
Sure. I do need to straighten out something with the family court case. While Mr. Miller mentioned that they would go pick up the children every single day, they did not have children together. Those were children from his prior marriage. I would be surprised that he would have them every day. Usually there's a custody schedule. But anyway, the family court matter is pending to address a division of the marital estate. And so there are no custody issues. It's also not a divorce. In the state of South Carolina, you can't get a divorce unless you have grounds. Mica certainly had grounds. She had grounds for physical cruelty. She had grounds for adultery. And she chose not to go that route. So it's a family court proceeding. The reason that it's pending now is simply to divide the marital estate and get that part, that was hers. The other action that is pending, of course, is the probate case. And the probate case, of course, is going to deal with her estate. And generally, if a person dies with the will, then her estate would have been distributed pursuant to her wishes in the will. So there was no will. And because of that, it's going to be divided pursuant to the statutory provisions, which usually says if you're married, goes to your spouse. And if you're married and have children, it's divided between the two, etc. So basically, the point of that is that he's trying to become the personal representative of the estate, while Sierra is serving as what we call the special administrator of the estate. And so her duties are to collect, the property that may belong to the estate, to pursue particular litigation. At that time, it was specifically for the marital litigation so that we could keep that going and, not be dismissed. As far as any other actions, I've been retained for the civil action. The civil action, multiple types of things or actions, in my opinion. There may be some folks that would disagree with me, but I think that there's a potential wrongful death case that it's, there's not really much on point for that. So I think that it's maybe a novel issue that I'm certainly willing to take up in this case. I can't think of a better fact pattern than this one.
I was about to say, if there's a case that's going to test that theory, this would be it.
It would be it. Also, the other thing that I feel like is a very strong case is called intentional infliction of emotional distress. That is a legal cause of action, a tort claim that exists on the books in the state of South Carolina. And there is indisputably enough evidence to support that as well. We also think of assault, and we also think of battery. Okay, most people think of those terms in criminal terms, but it also exists in the civil world. So we can sue for assault, that is, placing a point of fear into someone. There's also a battery, civil battery, and that is unwanted touch, which we have evidence of that too. So those are some of the civil actions that could be proposed. The other thing is I believe that Mica was underpaid by the church. So she certainly was not a volunteer because she was paid. She had 7 or 8 positions that were all sorely underpaid. If you extrapolated one of those positions, for instance, I think it was the media director, the range of salary is somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 a year. So I think that there may be a claim against the church for underpayment of wages.
I want to shift gears to the criminal side of this. There have been reports, several media outlets here on the coast, national outlets as well, have reported that there's a federal component to this investigation beyond the Robeson County investigation into Mica's death. We've also been told that there are investigations related to other potential victims of John Paul Miller. Let me ask you this. What can you tell us from your perspective about any potential criminal investigations into John Paul, and are any of your clients cooperating with those?
Right. So one of the things that I have said over and over is basically, for instance, I have an order stating that Mica's personal property, when the legal authorities are finished with their investigation, that it'll be returned to my office. I have sent a couple of letters to the Robeson County Sheriff's Department saying, hey, I have an order, give us the stuff, because you've completed your investigation from what we understand, right? You have your findings. So they denied the request, so they were not going to release the property at this time. That basically, the FBI had called in the FBI, and at this point, they're not going to release the property. They wouldn't tell me specifically why, but it was like the order says I get it when all legal authorities are complete, and so they've not released it to me. So I think that is an indication that something is still going on. As far as me having direct knowledge of it, no. And as far as them investigating or interviewing as well, certainly the family is cooperative in that manner. If and when asked, certainly we feel like we have a lot to offer up.
Obviously.
Yes.
Let me ask this question. There are 2 lines of inquiry that we've been reliably informed are underway. An investigation into finances, potential assets that John Paul Miller may have hidden, commingled, perhaps laundered, some have suggested. But then there's also allegations regarding to abuse, harassment, stalking, assault.
Yes.
For other victims.
Mm-hmm.
As those allegations kind of hang out there, obviously we have seen documented in detail in court filings from Mica's family, from her friends, from the first wife of John Paul Miller, who alleged a host of abuse. Would it surprise you if there were those twin paths to this investigation?
Not be surprised at all, and actually hopeful. And as Mica said, God will come and he will take care of everything.
That's true. Let me ask this question. Arguably the most significant component of this story, and I think you would attest to this at your press conference in the immediate aftermath of one of the first hearings, where, yes, there were some items to discuss about what transpired in the court that day, but the focus of what you talked about, and what I gather from watching the family on social media, one of their main focuses is how to protect other women, or other spouses, other people in relationships from being victimized in the same way that Mica was. And
Absolutely.
So the hashtag is justice for Mica, but the push on the coercive control legislation seems to be much bigger. Let me ask you this. There have been coercive control reform bills filed in South Carolina. They haven't gotten anywhere. Where do you see this debate going? And let's talk a little bit about that issue, what you see as sort of the key pillars of an effective piece of legislation here in South Carolina.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for asking that, because I think that it is critical. One of the wonderful things that has happened out of this horrible situation is that it has put a ginormous spotlight on this problem. This problem has existed forever. Women, particularly, and I know that men are, are in the same situation, but let's be honest, it's primarily women. Okay. And it is critical now that this has been brought to light that something be done about it. Because I'll tell you right now, if that bill or if that had been made a law, and if that law had been put into place several years before this happened to Mica, there is no doubt in my mind that there's a possibility she would still be alive. And the reason for that is because every single place that she went to get help, I mean, every place that she went to get help, she didn't get the help. She didn't get the help that she needed to escape from that situation. And it's because the laws are not set up. They can actually be abused, and that was happening. So had that been in place, it would have created stumbling blocks to start with. Okay, the police would have had something to look to. Whenever police hear,
I know people are on the opposite side with Ashley Benefield to me, and I don't mind that. I like being wrong. I like hearing why you believe the opposite to me, because I need both sides to understand where I fall into, where the middle is. But listening to this, like if she could have done this, if she could have done that, what happens if you are like Ashley Benefield, who I personally believe, and you go to the police and they don't believe you? You try to lay charges, they don't believe you. You put in protection orders, the judge denies it. It's not enough for me for there just to be those fail-safes. They have to be followed through better. It almost needs to be, it needs to be more pro-victim, in my opinion. If it's a safety related, if it's a restraining order, if it's a protection order, until it can be resolved.
I'm being abused, they say, where are the marks? Okay, they're looking for physical evidence. This is abuse that does not leave marks on your body, but it leaves horrible marks on the psyche, the mind, and self-confidence of a person.
That's what I think Doug did.
It is difficult for an officer to show up and determine, is this a coercive control situation? And so I believe that people are a little bit hesitant about it, because when you take the items one by one, in and of themselves do not seem to be, something that would be considered illegal in and of itself. And the point is that all of the different types of tactics and examples of coercive control that is outlined in the bill, you have to put them together, and in the totality of the circumstances, pulling all of that together, then appears the crime. So the problem with that is that there may be an opportunity to abuse even that situation, okay? Or that it goes too far, that it crosses the line, that an alleged victim is utilizing that actually for a control tactic reversed. So the way—
How do we prevent that from happening, though? Is there a way to draw the line?
Absolutely. I have a theory. My theory is this. First of all, whenever police officers show up to any place where there's an alleged crime, they investigate, they ask questions, they do that sort of a thing. Usually police officers are going to arrest someone whenever there's, probable cause for the arrest that they can see. Marks on the hand, whatever, the bruise. That is probable cause that they can see, so they can make that arrest. Now, if there's a situation that's much bigger, in other words, like a felony, those require a warrant, okay? So that means that if an officer observes these types of behaviors and says, hey, I'm not sure, but it appears that this may be a coercive control situation. I can't arrest this guy on site, but let me take this information to our local magistrate. And then the magistrate looks at it and determines, compares it to the law that will, hopefully be written one day, compares it to the law and determines whether there's probable cause. More likely than not, that's what that means. More likely than not that there is a crime occurring here. And then they can take that warrant and execute the warrant and pick up the person and arrest them for it. And then at that point, it's going to be up to the solicitor to garner the rest of the evidence, the journals, the patterns, the 19 phone calls to the police and all the things that have been reported. So then that to me would afford some protection from utilizing the law itself as a tool against someone else. But it's critically important that it goes a step further, because once someone is arrested for that crime, we'll call it for that crime, I think that the next step that needs to happen is when they get before the bondsman, which they're going to get, and of course once they get out, they are mad, right? So I think that it should be mandatory that anyone who's arrested under coercive control must wear a GPS monitor. No questions about it. It has definitely got to be one part mandatory as part of a bond that's being issued. So I think warrants are the way to do that. They can collect the evidence and have a magistrate determine if that's something that should be executed or not.
And in this case, had some of those statutes been on the books and that probable cause, more likely than not, tell me how that could have impacted what happened to Mica Miller.
Well, in terms of, for instance, whenever you call police, when you're at home in your jurisdiction, usually the police officers, when they're assigned, they're familiar with whatever territory. They also can look up quickly and say, oh, have we ever been in this home before? So they're like, oh, they're calling again. They called about this before. So the police officers can pick up a pattern with regard to actual calls. So had that happened, that would have alerted the police officer that there was a bit more going on here. I also think that there would have been an opportunity. Sometimes what police do, or a lot of times what they do, is they try to diffuse a situation when they get there to see, oh, let's see what's happening. Oh, you took her cell phone, you give it back to her, and
Problem solved.
and diffuse the situation. Sometimes what they'll do is encourage. Sir, you need to, can you go stay at your mom's or your best friend's tonight until everything calms down? Or maybe there's a situation where people are, under the influence of alcohol and they're acting out in things that you do whenever you're under alcohol and may not do, sober. So, and then also interviewing her when she would say things like, he's put trackers on me. He's, following me everywhere. He's showing up in places I wasn't expecting to show up. I'm in the middle of lunch and he turned off my cell phone, and he demoralizes me. He's called me names. He sent me threatening letters. He's incessantly calling me. I've told him over and over and over and over again, stop contacting me. And even after a police officer told him to stop contacting her, he did again. So when she's sitting there verbalizing all of these different things in the story, then the radar goes off into the police officer, who would say, hey, I think this is something that we need to report and put together, do an affidavit and submit it to the judge to see if the judge thinks there's enough here to issue a warrant for his arrest for violating coercive control.
You mentioned earlier that Mica was failed by the system, that she did the things that we want people to do, that we tell people to do, even though it was a conflict for her to do those things in some cases, difficult for her to do, but she nonetheless did those things. If a law is passed that addresses some of these issues, these deficiencies, as you refer in the coercive control arena, if we don't have officers, prosecutors, judges who are going to consistently enforce those statutes, someone who has connections with law enforcement like John Paul Miller, we keep hearing that you don't know how powerful this guy is, the church, and these connections he has. How does that play into it?
Well, I think that, education is key here. I understand, people have sometimes legitimate concerns about the status or the position or the power of someone. If there are resources made available, which they are not in Horry County, it's so embarrassing that there has not been a battered women's, shelter here in over a decade, which is just disgusting, in my opinion. There's not enough resources. There are actually a couple of websites that a person can go to get some information on what can I do, where do I go, how do I get help. And I actually sat down one evening and I role played for a minute. I said, okay, I'm going to pretend that I'm in a coercive control relationship and that he's gone to sleep and or passed out drunk, whatever it is. I got a few minutes to get on the computer that he does not allow me to get on. And I got on there and I tried to do some research real fast. A bunch of junk popped up. And then finally I got to a place where I'm still breathing heavy, thinking he's going to wake up any minute from me clicking on the keys, right? A website pops up and says, I'm basically at the right place and what can I do? And it was call a number and also if it had what they called an exit button, because if he walks in and sees him on the computer, it's, what are you doing on the computer? What were you looking up? What were you doing? Okay, so you want to have something on the screen that says, I was looking up a recipe, or something. And so that website had an exit button. And when you hit the exit button, it's supposed to take you to a weather station. When I hit the exit button, it went to the Google search bar. So the question then would have been, what were you about to look up? Okay. So it's not working properly. And I really, honestly, I cannot figure out for the life of me why people in general, and especially people who are in power that can make a difference, do not really have any sympathy or have any concern about the gravity of abuse in a home. It's like, it's not happening to me. It doesn't exist.
And I think after watching the conversations with Ashley Benefield, there's definitely a misunderstanding of like how different physical and mental are, because almost immediately it was like, yeah, but he never hit her. Okay, but there are people that have been in these relationships that 50, 60 years down the line still can't do something because they're scared. It doesn't have to be physical. It can literally be a look. It can be something very small. Lisa, I did DBT and I didn't like my therapist. That's a whole nother day story. But my psychologist brings in CBT into my normal sessions quite a lot, and it is helpful. I very much like the two things can be true at the same time sort of thinking. I think it's good just for life. I know as well a lot of people have had success with CBT for their OCD. My OCD is just like, it's so up and down. It will either be really bad or it'll be absolutely chilled. No in between. Just ramps up to the point where like I am having a complete breakdown, need to go to the doctor, scared of the doctor, etc., or I'm chilled. It's like there's no in between at all, which I guess is kind of true of OCD, is like learning the line.
Another thing is like, and this is just slightly off topic, but I'm just incensed in how it's not being properly addressed any form of abuse. There's this, I don't know, they're supposed to have this operation to help with, people who are in human trafficking, sex trafficking and things like that. And the state and the governor, who else, was just applauding themselves and what they're doing. Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. I walked through an airport and there was a tiny little sign that said, if you're a victim, call this number, which was a number that no one would ever be able to memorize. Can we get a hashtag 12, a hashtag one, something that's
Quick text
fast,
code or something?
something
Yeah.
that's easy, something, 1-800 help me or save me or something. It was the
Like
number.
the suicide prevention line. And
Yes, it was ridiculous to me. I was like, this is laughable and it's embarrassing. It is embarrassing. That same information, which should have been on the back of every single door of every stall in there. Because, and there should be hot phones on the wall that whenever you walk by, you can grab it real fast and say, help me. What's going to happen? Boom, cameras are on it. Notice has gone out. Can we get some real help out here? And that's the thing, the people, our government, or the folks who are supposed to be helping, who walk around and pretend that they are and tout that they are. Okay, where's our abuse shelter for women? It's not here. Where are the actual real solid resources? There is a resource booklet that I downloaded, and it gave phone numbers to call. Oh, if you're in an abusive situation, call this number. I called it. It was out of service. Please help me, somebody.
well, there are powerful elected officials here. I mean, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the South Carolina Senate, Luke Rankin, represents this area. Where is he?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to know where he is, but I'll tell you this. He cried like a baby on Facebook because I called him out for not doing his job.
Senator Rankin.
Excuse me?
Senator Rankin did.
Senator Luke Rankin cried like a baby on Facebook because I called him out. He was, and still is, head of the Judiciary Committee. Mica's Law is what I'm going to call it, the Coercive Control Bill, was introduced multiple times, twice in the House and once in the Senate. You get it in the Senate, you got the most powerful senator that's there, head of the judiciary. You think he's got some power? Yes, he's got power. So he failed to use the power to take care of the citizens of the state of South Carolina. He walks around saying that he made a difference or makes a difference, that he's done so much for this county or this state, etc. Please, please, please tell me why. Please tell me why, when there was a request put forward for money to build a battered women's shelter, which we haven't had for 12 years. We refer everybody down to Georgetown. Good luck getting there. Where is the money for that? So there are two very fine gentlemen who have been working on the project, Fred Nesta and Mike King. They themselves, just citizens, they're not involved in government, saw this need, and they have been working diligently to try to raise the money for years, raise enough money to build this shelter. They were successful in finding, a wonderful donor, a benefactor who gave land for it. They put together the plans, the drawings, and so forth. Turns out they needed about $3 million. $3 million. So they go before, have someone put forth a request in the budget to have some money, given to them to help do this very, very important thing that helps a lot of people, our community. They were shot down on the $3 million, but they were kind enough to give them $1 million. That's a lot of money. That's great, but we need 3.
Okay, I have to pause that there because we're going to have to go across to the trial ASAP, and I need to get back to work. I've got a lot of writing to do today. I'm going to be focusing very, very, very hard. My OCD is generally, so when I say it's like really bad or not at all, I will, like there are actually like minor things, but like I track everyone in my family's their locations are all on the security app that we have, so that like when my mom leaves my house, I'm literally watching that she gets home okay, because my brain will say that she's not going to. So I'm like constantly like, I need control of like all my environments. When it's really bad, then I just get like all the intrusive thoughts, and every tiny thing becomes a huge thing. And sometimes that can come out in hypochondria, but I don't have death anxiety about myself. It's more like what will happen to the people I love. So like if I get a random disease and land up sick, and then like I pass it on to someone else and they don't survive and I do, like that's where my brain goes. But there was a time where my doctor that knew how to handle my OCD moved countries. Had another doctor, she also later moved countries. My heart was racing, and it wasn't anxiety. It was, well, I thought it was an anxiety because it didn't feel like anxiety. I didn't have a doctor to go to, and I was constantly like bawling. I thought I was going to have a panic. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. No one was going to believe me. Vaughn was going to have to like deal with me like dying in the house. It was like my head went to the craziest of places. Thankfully, I found a lovely doctor that did an ECG, made sure I was okay. I took that little clippy on thing that shows your heart rate, which I no longer use ever. He made sure that they were like calibrated with his, all worked out. But it can go like to that extreme where I actually can't function. Like another time I watched a video about a girl about my age who randomly went blind, and I was convinced I was going blind. Turned out I was having too much caffeine and my pupils were dilating. But it's always got to be like 5,000. And in the stages where we had, just after we had the whole mold situation, I was so scared that the mold was, because when you live in a house with mold, you breathe it in, it goes into your lungs. You have to do like all sorts of like cleansing things, whatever. It's not like woo-woo cleansing, like legitimate science cleansing, but you breathe it in and it affects you in big ways. And so I'd get obsessive about tiny pieces of what I thought was mold, anything that looked like it could be mold. It would reach the point where I was like cleaning in the folds of the fridge with like an earbud and a toothbrush. So the rest of the house can be chaotic and messy, not dirty, but messy. But I would be focused on this tiny little thing, because if I don't clean this thing, it's going to get into our food. And then all of a sudden, like one of us two is going to land up very sick, and it's going to escalate to this point, So it's generally around like health and death anxiety, but not for me, which I guess is kind of lucky, because I know there's a lot of people that really struggle with that. When it's yourself, you can't really, like, it's hard to not dump that on someone else. Like I can say to Vaughn, I'm worried about my mum, and he will gladly say like, well, let's just go check in. He knows that like I won't be able to let it go. Or like if I message my siblings like, hey, have you spoken to mom? They know that like I just need them to be like, not to be like, don't over exaggerate, she's probably busy, to be like, hey, yeah, I spoke to her at this time, and carry on with it like that. If it was me and myself, I would struggle. Yeah, Mel, sounds like hypochondria actually, which is also downplayed a lot. And my hypochondria is mild. It's more like, it also didn't help that I used to be a traffic reporter on radio. So I knew, or I was living, eating, breathing, sleeping, car accidents all day, every day. So every time someone is going on the road, I can already picture it happening. Like I'll be driving and I'll just picture cars coming through the center of it at me, and I always survive and the person next to me never does in my head. And like people have these every now and then, but when it reaches the level of like every single time you're in the car, you need help. Hey, Karina. Okay, I've set up this portal, but because the portal keeps breaking, I'm going to do a backup Now my heart is racing because I was talking about my heart racing. Ironically, what really helped me with my OCD and health related things, it's really weird, but watching Dr. Mike. I can't share this. The Mica Miller thing. I hope so. Her story needs to be told. Mel, you know what will actually, you know what's a great thing? Tetris. Tetris, you're gonna have to Google it, but there's science that shows that your brain can't have a panic attack and play Tetris at the same time. So especially when I'm writing very difficult news stories, Tetris is my saving grace. Oh, wow, there's already people over there waiting. Shame. Oh, thanks, Steve. Yeah, and you can get the Tetris app on iPad or phone or whatever. It's great. Absolutely loving it. Okay, let's head over. I'm worried court's going to start. So I will see you there. I'm going to leave this. I need to pin this. Why is it not pinning? Pin it on my phone. Right. See you there. Hang tight.